Nearly 100,000 veterans living in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, and Maryland area depend upon the Washington, D.C. Veterans Affairs Medical Center for their medical care. For years, serious and urgent problems festered at this medical center, endangering the lives and care of these veterans. From 2013 to 2016, leadership at the medical center and the Veterans Health Administration received at least 7 written reports detailing significant and substantial deficiencies. It is, in our view, shameful how many warning signs were ignored and for too long. In March of 2017, a confidential complainant alerted the VA Office of the Inspector General to equipment and supply issues, and I quote, "sufficient to potentially compromise patient safety." The conditions were so appalling that the Office of Inspector General took the highly unusual step of issuing an interim report in April of that year. The ensuing investigation culminated in the scathing March of 2018 critical deficiency report, which really was the genesis of today's hearing. There are far too many glaring problems in this 158-page report to enumerate. But the OIG did issue 40 recommendations, and we need a mechanism to monitor progress and continuing implementation of those 40 recommendations. At the root of the deficiencies is what the Inspector General, Michael Missel, politely deemed, and I quote, "a culture of complacency." But what I, frankly, would have called a culture of indifference to their patients. Leaders at multiple levels failed to address, according to the IG, failed to address previously identified serious issues with a sense of any urgency or purpose. In interviews, leaders frequently abrogated individual responsibility and deflected blame to everybody else. How else do you explain the laundry list of critical deficiencies known to VA leadership that threatened harm to patients, and yet these problems persisted for the better part of a decade? Last month, my colleague Eleanor Holmes Norton and I visited the facility and met with the new director, Mr. Heimel, and his senior leadership team for several hours about actions that have been taken to address the exigent concerns raised by the OIG. Shortly after that visit, Ranking Member Meadows and I sent the director a letter requesting information regarding mental health treatment at the D.C. Medical Center. Today, I am here to put the leadership on notice. Congress will not stand for continued failures that threaten the health and safety of our veterans at what ought to be the VA's flagship medical center. Unfortunately, it's anything but. According to the OIG, the D.C. Virginia Veterans Medical Center put veterans at risk through needless hospitalizations, unnecessary anesthesia, failure to use preferred surgical techniques, all because important supplies, instruments, and equipment were not always accessible. As of March 31 of 2017, the facility had a backlog of 10,904 open or pending consults for prosthetic items, ranging from eyeglasses and hearing aids to surgical implants and artificial limbs. One patient waited more than 1 year for his prosthetic leg. This is a veteran we're talking about. And eventually he gave up and moved to another state where a different veterans facility promptly filled his request. The level and breadth of neglect detailed in the report is almost inconceivable and certainly callous. The OIG found that some progress certainly has been made, as did we. After a tumultuous 2-year period in which the facility was led by 5 different directors in a 2-year period, a new permanent director testifying before the subcommittee has taken the helm, and all senior leadership positions are now occupied, I believe, by permanent staff. In May of 2018, the OIG reported that the availability of supplies had improved and that prosthetics backlog eliminated. And that's genuine progress. But given the history here, we must be aware of what lies behind the metrics, or the ostensible metrics. Leaders must measure and examine customer satisfaction at the end of the day. Are veterans receiving the appropriate care that meets their medical needs and treatment expectations? Are employees empowered to report patient safety incidents, and do they trust that leadership, when reported, will, in fact, address them? How can we ensure that this never happens again, whether at this facility or any other that is charged with delivering care to those who served our nation in uniform? Previous wake-up calls have come and gone, and veterans in need sometimes continue to suffer. In February of this year, one of my constituents sought inpatient admission for a drug withdrawal set of symptoms, including anxiety and pain management at this facility. After the hospital first evaluated him, and a second doctor decided to not admit him, the veteran's wife found him dead of a gunshot wound in their home the following week. Just last month, there was a shocking report of a psychiatric patient at this facility who escaped from a locked area and traveled to Virginia with, by the way, the help of one of the employees at the facility. Not that he was complicit, but he apparently was not suspicious of somebody in a hospital gown and called him a cab. He went to Virginia and abducted and assaulted a woman, resulting in his arrest. I'd like to play a clip from that NBC4 report with the indulgence of my ranking member.
Internal VA records obtained by the I-Team say the 29-year-old man from Manassas escaped the psychiatric ward at the D.C. VA Medical Center after entering the shower very late Sunday night. By removing the ceiling tiles, removing part of the ceiling ventilation, and crawling to a neighboring office outside the locked space. Here's what happened next, according to a relative.
He went through the emergency room and asked someone in the emergency room, the staff at the hospital, to call a taxi cab.
And they called him a cab.
They called him a cab.
He was wearing his hospital clothes.
He was wearing his scrub bottoms and a tank top.
The relative did not want to be identified because the man is accused of taking that cab ride to a home in Manassas, where police said he held a woman he knew against her will and assaulted her. Prince William County Police arrested him. It was hours later when the VA discovered their patient was missing. But that relative told us something else. Before getting in the cab, the patient called home to alert family he was out. The relative then called the VA hospital twice to warn them the man had escaped, but said they couldn't even confirm if he was even a patient. You tried to warn them that he'd escaped?
I did.
And they didn't go look?
No, they didn't even bother walking to check his room.
This is the latest in a series of black eyes for the medical center. Recent News 4 I-Team investigations revealed a patient overdosed in the parking lot in 2017, but his body went undiscovered there for nearly a day.
I won't even comment. Incidents like this remind us there's a long road ahead. Putting procedures in place is the easy part. Eradicating the culture of indifference or complacency, that's the hard part, and it will take a significant investment on the part of leadership. We are here today to insist that our new director, Mr. Heimel, rise to the task, and we'll support him, assuming he does, and that he stay long enough and commit to stay and work hard to hear every patient and employee's concerns to rectify those issues and to communicate needed changes that foster trust within the facility. We should never have to tell this story. Men and women who put on the uniform to protect our country had every reason to believe they would receive the highest quality health care as a statement of our commitment to them. That's our part of the contract. Instead, they encountered mediocrity at best. No one, inside or outside of government, can possibly accept that standard. For everyone who works at D.C. Veterans Medical Center, from the custodian to the cardiac surgeon, There must be one standard, and that's one of excellence. We'll settle for nothing less. With that, I call upon the distinguished ranking member, my friend, Mr. Meadows from North Carolina, for his statement.